Hey folks, this is Kelani. Welcome back to the Battle of Dazar'alor raid guides for normal and heroic. This time we'll be taking down JAINA. Seeing as this is the last boss of the instance, it shouldn't come as a surprise that there's a lot to keep track of, and this can be a very long fight. Throughout the encounter you will deal with Chilling Touch. If you get hit by any of JAINA's frost spells, you gain stacks of Chilling Touch. This deals damage over time and reduces your movement speed, but if any player gets to 20 stacks and falls below 80% health, they will get stunned in an ice block. If you're stuck in an ice block, you'll take damage over time and your raid will have to DPS down the ice block to get you out. Seeing as ice blocks count as a stun, you can remove it with abilities like Icebound Fortitude or Paladin Bubble. It's super important that you avoid JAINA's abilities so you don't get too many stacks, but thankfully there are a few ways to clear them in most phases. During the first phase you'll fight JAINA on the big boat. Every so often some Kulturan ships will arrive on the left or the right side, which you'll need to defend against. To get rid of the ships you'll need to fire the 3 ballistae on that side. It takes 6 shots to get rid of a ship, so 2 shots from each ballistae should do the trick. You'll also have some adds drop down onto the boat and try to set off some explosive barrels. You can pick these barrels up and move to the edge of the boat to throw them overboard before they explode, or you can stun the adds right when they land or during their set charge cast and you won't get any barrels whatsoever. These adds will attack random targets but they don't really do a lot of damage. Ranged DPS should swap them to kill them quickly because they will place bombs repeatedly. While an enemy ship is engaged with you, it will also bombard the deck. Red AoE circles will appear on the ground, and after a short delay, a cannon strike will hit that area, dealing damage to anyone in the AoE and leaving a patch of fire on the ground. These patches of fire are super important as they're the only way to clear your stacks in phase 1. Just step in a patch of fire for a split second to clear your stacks, then hop back out. Obviously you don't want too much of this fire, otherwise you'll run out of room, so firing those ballistae and getting 6 shots off to get rid of the enemy ships is very important. On heroic mode, the bombard AoEs will also knock you back if you get hit, so be extra careful on heroic. Your ballistae can get set on fire as well, which renders them inoperable, so clearing excess patches of fire and clearing the fire near your ballistae is important too. The only way to do that is with the avalanche ability. JAINA will target several random players and launch a barrage of ice at them for 5 seconds. These swirls hurt a lot, so try not to run over your raid and don't get hit by your own swirls as you're running around, but avalanche is the only way to clear fire in this phase, so put out any fires on your ballistae and clean up most of the fire on deck whenever an avalanche goes out. The tanks will also have to worry about Ice Shard. On normal this just deals damage so it's not too much to worry about, but on heroic the tanks will get a stacking debuff which increases the damage of Ice Shard. Usually the tanks get targeted by avalanche, so you'll typically tank swap for that to let the Ice Shard fall off. Tanks will also gain stacks of Chilling Touch faster than anyone else, so just be sure that your tanks are clearing their stacks in phase 1 by touching a patch of fire before they get to 20. She will also cast Grasp of Frost, which will root several players for 8 seconds. While you're rooted, you'll gain stacks of Chilling Touch pretty quickly, so these should be dispelled as quickly as possible. Then we also have Freezing Blast. JAINA will face towards a player and start casting. Take note of the casting animation, the large circle in the air is where the ability will fire off towards, just don't stand wherever she's facing. If you get hit, you'll get knocked back, and we're on a ship, so be careful you don't get knocked off. Her most dangerous ability in the first phase is Ring of Ice. She'll cover a large area around her with frost and start casting. If anyone is still in the ice when the cast finishes, they will instantly be frozen in a block of ice. That's really bad, so move out of the ring quickly. Anyone outside of the ring will get rooted, but there's a really easy way to deal with this. Just stand in a patch of fire during Ring of Ice and you'll all break free of the root immediately. This means you should always have one patch of fire that will be outside of the boss's Ring of Ice, so don't clear all of the fire with avalanche. On heroic mode, the boss will also use Time Warp, which just increases her haste, but that means tanks will get stacks faster and she'll cast everything faster, so just stay on your toes until her Time Warp falls off. When the boss gets to 60%, she'll teleport away and freeze pretty much everything. From this point onwards, everyone in the raid will gain stacks of Chilling Touch periodically. You need to follow her into the icy domain she just created. During this transition, your vision will be reduced, and the only way to end the effect is to find JAINA in the storm and interrupt her cast. Between you and the boss you'll find swirling tornadoes which deal a huge amount of damage if you walk into them, and JAINA will also spam the area with glacial shards. These are the smaller orbs, and if you walk into one of these you will be instantly frozen in a block of ice, which again is really bad. But the glacial shards always move away from the boss, so you can follow them to find JAINA easily. We sent a mobile player ahead to interrupt her as quickly as possible to make it easier for everyone else to get through the transition. When you interrupt her, phase 2 starts. During this phase, every ability that the boss uses will leave a patch of ice on the ground, as if we didn't have enough to deal with. Standing in that patch will give you stacks of Chilling Touch very quickly, so stay out of them. The boss will still use Ice Shard and Avalanche on the tanks, but now when Avalanche triggers, it will spawn little ice claws which move outwards toward the raid. If you get hit by these, you'll get rooted and start gaining stacks really quickly. These need to be avoided as much as possible. She will also use Glacial Ray. She faces a random player and uses the same cast animation from before, the large blue circle in the air, and fires out a beam which reaches across the entire area. You have to avoid this beam. It will give you way too many stacks and it deals an insane amount of damage. Her other ability in this phase is Icefall. A whitish blue arrow will appear at the edge of the room pointing inwards. After a short delay, ice comets will strike the area in a line following the direction of the arrow. These deal a lot of damage, give you a lot of stacks, and leave patches of ice on the floor. Move away from the area that's been targeted when you see the Icefall arrows, or you're going to have a really bad time. Sadly, we don't have any patches of fire in this phase, but there is one way to clear your stacks of Chilling Touch. Around the room you can find unexploded ordnance barrels. If you kill one of those, it will give you a large warming area for a little while before exploding. You want to stay in the warming effect as long as you can, but be sure to move out before the barrel explodes. At the start of the phase, these barrels have a refractive ice debuff, which reduces the damage they take by 99%. The only way to remove that debuff is to hit the barrels with broadside. Several players will get a purple arrow over their head. When it expires, a large arcane AoE will blast the area, dealing a lot of damage within 10 yards, but also removing that pesky ice debuff from any barrels. So you need to break the ice from the barrels with broadside so you can kill them when you need them. On normal, you will get 4 barrels total, and on heroic you will only have 3 to work with. Only kill the barrels when you really need to reset your stacks. On heroic, we broke a barrel at around 50% health on the boss, another one at around 40%, and then the last barrel just before we transitioned at around 32%. Save the barrel towards the north for last. The last ability in this phase is Siegebreaker Blast. One target will get a large purple swirly effect on them, and after a short delay a huge blast will trigger at their location. This deals fall off damage, so the player with the debuff needs to run out of the raid. When the boss gets to 30% health, she will teleport into the middle of the room and create an expanding ring of ice. If anyone touches this ring, they'll get frozen instantly. The only way to get out of the area is to break down the ice wall, which is towards the north of the arena. You should end the previous phase right next to the wall after using the closest barrel to reset your stacks, so you can get right to DPSing the ice wall down. You need to kill the wall before the ring gets to you, and then run into the little lane to find Nathanos and an elemental. When you break Nathanos out of his ice block, you'll start the next phase and the ring of ice will disappear, so you should actually wait until the ring of ice actually reaches Nathanos to break the ice. That will give you more free time to DPS down the elemental. This elemental has a few abilities to worry about as well. Heart of Frost is a debuff which is applied to a random player. That player will pulse frost damage around them, so just make sure to step out of the raid. When the elemental gets to 100 energy, they will also cast Frost Nova. This deals damage to everyone in 12 yards and freezes them in place. This can be dispelled, or you can just move away from the elemental when it casts it. I don't think I ever saw the elemental actually cast this though, so maybe it's bugged, or maybe it only casts it if it reaches 100 energy before you break Nathanos out. Either way, you can still move away or dispel it. On heroic mode, the elemental will try to use Water Bolt Volley. This deals a lot of damage, so just be sure to interrupt it every time it tries to cast it. After you break Nathanos out, you want to kite the elemental back to JAINA and continue killing it. During this time, JAINA will be bombarding the area with arcane barrages. Just avoid the arcane AoEs. Until you interrupt the boss, she will also take 99% reduced damage, so kill the elemental and then interrupt JAINA to start the last phase. JAINA will still use Ice Shard, Glacial Ray and Icefall in this phase, so keep avoiding those. Both Broadside and Siegebreaker Blasts will continue as well, so deal with those appropriately. The boss will also use Crystalline Dust. This is a large cone effect that deals a lot of damage, but it's always faced towards the tank. Just don't stand behind the tank and you shouldn't get hit. She will also cast Prismatic Image, which creates a mirror image of JAINA which copies all of her casts. That means 2 Ice Falls, 2 Glacial Rays. You get the idea. You need to nuke the image down as quickly as you can. But the main problem in this phase is that you don't have any way to clear your stacks. That means everyone will get frozen at least once in this phase, and whenever a player gets frozen, JAINA will wind up a shattering lance right at them. This lance points towards any frozen player and fires off in a straight line that deals quite a lot of damage, but it triples to anyone who is frozen. That's more or less a death sentence, so as players get frozen in this phase, you have to break them out as quickly as possible and avoid the lances. You should try to stagger getting frozen so you always have enough DPS to break the ice blocks out. If everyone gets frozen, you're just gonna die. That means some of your raid might have to get a few extra stacks by standing in frost puddles so they get frozen first. We had some of our strongest AoE DPS get frozen first, so that when several others were getting frozen at the same time, we had enough DPS to break them out. On Heroic mode, Jaina has one more ability in this phase, Orb of Frost. She'll start casting an Orb of Frost towards a random player. You need to soak that orb to reduce its size and power, because when it runs out of power, or when it reaches the end of its path, it will explode, dealing damage to the raid and applying a lot of stacks of Chilling Touch. The more power it has when it explodes, the higher the damage and the more stacks it gives everyone, so ideally you just want to stack it until it explodes. We had 3 melee and 2 hunters soak the orb to reduce its size, but that also meant they would get frozen first, so that actually helped us offset some of the ice cubes later on. Throughout this phase, your raid would ideally be pretty close to the boss so that when they get frozen, they're already in range of the melee to just nuke them down. Whenever you use Lust, Jaina will use Ice Block and become immune for 20 seconds. This might seem like a really cheap mechanic, but in the last phase, that gives you 20 seconds of breathing room to get caught up with frozen players. We waited until a lot of raid members were getting high stacks and popped Lust so we could get through as many as possible before the boss started attacking again. Because the boss isn't casting anything too, any images that are up at the same time will just stand there doing nothing, so you should save Lust for this last phase and use it when you need to catch back up. As long as you break your ice cubes out quickly, you should be fine. All that's left to do is dodge the other 6 mechanics which can one-shot you. Easy enough. Jaina flees when she reaches 5%, so you don't have to get it all the way down to 0 as well. And that's all you should need to take down Jaina on normal and heroic, and that's it for the Battle of Dazar'alor. Every other boss is covered, so if you're struggling with anything, hopefully my guys can help you get through some of the harder bosses. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to join these lovely guys and gals, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.